Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to Alta Live. This is our weekly conversation series where we bring the stories that appear in Alta Journal to life by talking to authors and photographers and illustrators, and sometimes even the subjects that are featured in stories, not just in our print journal, but also in our online only stories. So if you don't know Alta or what it is, I'm going to just take a couple of minutes to talk about it as everyone files into the Zoom room and before we start our conversation with Shannon. Alta is a quarterly publication. We are focusing on stories about California and the West. We write about arts and culture and the environment and history, lots of books coverage, occasionally talk about technology, all different types of topics about this region that people from all over the world are endlessly fascinated by. So we encourage everyone in the Zoom room to actually say where you're zooming in from. My name is Mary Melton. I'm an editor at large based in Los Angeles, just a few miles from the original location of the Disney studios, which I drive by all the time, which I'm excited to talk to Shannon about. But we'd love to know where you are zooming in from. So use that chat window that's on the side to tell us. And be sure that you mark on there that you're talking to everyone and not just the host and the panelists, because otherwise only Shannon and I are going to see it. And we love to hear from people over there. And be sure to use the Q&A button that's on the bottom if you have any questions during the call, because we love to take questions at the end. But a couple more words about Alta and how you can support us. We have a great membership deal, right? For $50 a year, you can get the journal. That's 4 issues a year. It's a big, beautiful magazine that people swear they keep. I know lots of stuff piles up, but people keep these. We're 33 issues into this. And it's full of beautiful photography and original illustrations and incredible stories like Shannon's. And occasionally we also put something fun in here, a little Easter egg, if you will. This month it's a folio. It's what we call these little mini books. That's about the disappearance and afterlife of Lou Welsh, who was a beat poet. These are just really great little collectibles. You can also buy these at our shop on altaonline.com. But for $50 a year, you get the magazine, you get full access to our entire digital archive. So as I said, we're 33 issues. We just closed our 33rd issue. We're 33 issues into this. So there's lots and lots and lots of stories. So you won't hit the paywall if you become a member. You'll have full access to all of that. And then we also are adding a copy of a book of cartoons. So on the back page of all Altas, we do these wonderful cartoons. So we have a compilation of cartoons from our issues. So you'll get a copy of that book in addition to the magazines and access to everything. So please, the way we can pay writers to write these wonderful stories and photographers to take these beautiful pictures is by actually having support from our members. You can also engage with us with the newsletters. Those are free. We have a Monday book review and then a weekly original story that we run that you can sign up for at altaonline.com. And we do a monthly California book club. So next Thursday, we'll be talking to Amy Tan. It's so great. We got Amy Tan, the author of the Joy Luck Club. She's going to be talking about the Backyard Bird Chronicles, which is her best-selling book, documenting her time getting fascinated with the birds in her yard, and it's full of beautiful illustrations by Amy. She can kind of do everything. She is so delightful. She's wonderful. I've met her. She's just lovely. I really encourage you to come to that conversation. Those are very intimate, lovely evenings. They're at 5 p.m., usually on the third Thursday of the month. So that'll be next week, 5 p.m. Pacific time. Please join us. And there'll be a link in the newsletter we send you, or the email we send you after this, to how you can sign up for that. And you can also join us online only if you don't want this big, beautiful magazine, which I think you should get. But if you just want to do strictly online only, it's $3 a month. So please support us, and we'd love to have you be a member. Okay, let's get to our talk, and let me introduce our guest, Shannon McHugh. Shannon is a scholar of French and Italian Renaissance literature. She's smart. I'm guessing she's just smart. And is the assistant director of research at the Huntington, the incredible art library and botanical gardens in San Marino, which if you've never visited is an absolute must on anyone's Los Angeles list. She's the author of Petrarch and the Making of Gender in Renaissance Italy. And she's working on a book about the library of the Walt Disney Studio. So Shannon, welcome to Alta Live.
Thanks so much, Mary. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm really excited to talk to you about this because, as I mentioned to you, I have as many people do in Los Angeles, I have a personal connection to Disney. We all have some kind of way into Disney and our Disney origin story. But today we're talking about your story in this issue, which is about Bianca Majoli. I'm saying her last name correctly? Okay. And she was, here's our illustration of her. She was, we say here, Walt Disney's first female storyteller who supplied the heartfelt narratives that helped Snow White, Bambi, and Pinocchio become some of the studio's most memorable films. So I want to start with your origin story because here we have a scholar of Petrarch writing about Walt Disney Studios and Bambi. So tell us how that came to be.
Yeah, so when I was graduating college, my very first job was actually in Walt Disney World in Florida. I'm from California. I went to USC, but I thought that I was going to go work for the Disney company. Was one of these like Disney California kids. So I was a tour guide in Florida. It's so funny because last week, your Alta Live was about the frozen dead guy story. Um, and the joke that we were trained to make on this, I did this backstage tour where we went into the tunnels. And the first tour when you took the first joke when you took the guests into the tunnels was, you're going to see a lot of exciting things here, but you're not going to see Walt Disney's frozen head. Because there was this rumor after he died, because he had been so fascinated with technology that he had cryogenically frozen himself, which isn't true. He's buried in the forest lawn near here. But
He's there for sure. He's underground.
yeah.
Okay.
um, but yeah, just so funny to have two frozen dead guy story Alta lives back to back.
Yeah.
So I worked there right out of college as a tour guide. And after a couple of years, decided that that wasn't really the career path for me after all. So then but I think it did help me figure out that I love storytelling, and that being a tour guide helped me figure out that I love teaching. So I went from there to grad school and then followed this career path where I became a professor of Renaissance Italian and French literature, mostly working on women writers. Um, and I thought Disney was just sort of relegated to the fandom part of my life when a few years ago, the Met Museum hosted an exhibition called Inspiring Walt Disney. It was done in partnership with the Huntington, where I didn't work then, but I work now. And I saw the two iterations of it in the US, and I loved the exhibition. Wolf Bircher, the curator, is amazing. Uh, but this one thing jumped out at me. There was a case displaying some open books, and they were labeled as having come from the now defunct library at the Walt Disney Studios. And as a literature person, as a former Disney tour guide, I was like, how have I never heard of this library? And that set me off on this research path where I have now researched what remains of the collection, which is held at the Disney Imagineering Resource Center. And I just became really interested in, especially the medieval and Renaissance books that were in this collection. It's just shocking, like the riches in the library, which I can talk about a little more if you want. But ultimately, I went from Renaissance literature to great books in the Disney Studio Library to asking, well, who used these great books? And that's how I found Bianca Majoli.
Yeah, like I've heard of the Disney archives, but I'd honestly never heard of the library.
It's just wild. I think in part it's because it was shuttered in the 1980s. And yeah, I feel like the Disney Archives, which is where the company stores its own history, its own meeting notes and memos, and concept art and things, that is this like storied place. And getting to enter there and to read, to learn more about Bianca Majoli's work was a real dream of mine, because I feel like if you're somebody who loves Disney history, that is I don't know, the holy grail. But yeah,
Yeah.
this library was fascinating. It was from pretty early on. Walt Disney was collecting books as resources for his artists. Around 1930, he finally starts to try and gather it into a library of sorts. From 1934 on, they're cataloging the books, and then in 1935, he hires the first librarian, Helen Ludwig. I'm blanking on her very last name. And this is also around the time that Bianca Majoli starts. There is this push happening at the studios to really turn from just being a company that does short films and that are gags based, to being a
Mhm.
studio that can produce the first animated feature-length film, Snow White, and that can start thinking about story and character in a new way. And I feel like that's Bianca Majoli arrives just at the right time for that.
So the intent of this library was to serve as a source of inspiration for storytellers. Like what types of books was he putting in the library?
Great question. Yes. So it's supposed to be, um, some of them are sort of for consulting. Like there's books on the Great American Songbook, there's books on nature. But there's also a lot of stories, and some of the earliest acquisitions are um, turn into what we know as the most famous early Disney features. So he acquires really early a copy of Carlo Collodi's Pinocchio. He acquires a copy of the Grimm's fairy tales. He acquires Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan. He acquires Wizard of Oz. He acquires many copies of the Wizard of Oz because he's very serious about trying to adapt that. But then MGM gets the rights first, so they take on that
Mm.
project. Um, One of the things that is really interesting about this collection is um, what is there in addition to what you would expect, in addition to Grimm's and Alice in Wonderland. There's lots of surprises in there. I think this is what, like, as a literary scholar, this is what really drew me in. And in particular, there's a batch of books that arrive at the library in 1935. Walt and his brother Roy and their wives take an 11-week trip to Europe the summer of 1935. Walt spends a lot of his time in European bookstores. And at the end of that summer, he ships back 335 books in English, Italian, French, and German back to the library, and tells this new librarian, tells Helen, I need you to start cataloging these. And the when you see the library or these 335 books mentioned, I think um, the general theory is that, especially because a lot of them weren't in English, that Walt was sending them back just for the drawings.
Mm-hmm.
But this is part of what is exciting about, I think, a figure like Bianca Majoli is um, Walt is recruiting a lot of talent in this period. He's hiring a lot of story people and concept artists who are first and second generation European immigrants. And so just because Walt can't read all these books because he doesn't speak all these languages, he's hired people who can. And so my theory is that the books are serving both purposes. They're providing artistic inspiration through the illustrations, but he's so focused on story. And now he's getting people like Bianca Majoli, born in Italy in 1900. And she's somebody he can turn to and say, help me figure out how we're going to adapt Collodi because you actually know Pinocchio and you can read it in the original language.
And he has, as you said in the story, a special connection to her.
Yeah, they went to high school together in Chicago. They knew each other. He signed her yearbook in 1917.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, they barely knew each other, but he signed it and I think did a little drawing. Um, and then 17 years later, in 1934, by this time he's Walt Disney. There's Mickey Mouse, Silly Symphonies. They're starting the work on Snow White. She is an accomplished artist in her own right. She's an art director for J.C. Penney. She's gone to art school. She's worked around Europe and the United States, but she's looking for a change. And
Mhm.
she writes out of the blue to this old classmate and says, you probably won't remember me, but I have your autograph in my yearbook, and I have this comic strip that I've drawn, and I would love your advice on it. And they have these letters back and forth. He writes her back almost immediately, and they have this lovely written rapport. Um, he he agrees to look at her comic strip. He says, "Send it to me." He gives her some frank feedback, which is something that Walt Disney was always known for. He says, "There are some good ideas here, but the sketches are not very professionally done." And he says, however, "I will introduce you to a friend of mine who might be able to help you get it published." And he does do that favor for her. Again, like barely knowing each other. Although they have, again, they have this sort of like very friendly, jokey sort of rapport. She says at one point, she says, I hope we get the chance to meet again in person. I'm only 5 feet tall and I don't bite. And he says, it's too bad about the biting, but I'd still like to see you again at some point anyway. Uh, but so the comic strip doesn't work out, but she writes to him one more time and says, I'm coming out to LA and I would love to meet you. And they have lunch at Tam O'Shanter, which I probably some people on this call know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, such a was close to the Disney studio and was so popular with the staff that it was called the unofficial Disney commissary. They presumably sit at Walt's table, and she brings her portfolio. She shows him some more of her work, and he offers her a job on the spot.
That's an incredible story. And you can still sit at Walt's table. I wonder if they did sit at Walt's table. That's such a great detail. So it's also like a great lesson in don't be afraid to cold call someone who's even in the top spot.
There's hardly anybody in Hollywood more famous than Walt Disney at this moment, a total rising star. And she says, we had a single interaction in high school, but would you look at my art? And he
It's
says yes,
incredible.
and ends up giving her a job as, and she becomes the first woman hired in a creative role. So there are many women working at the studios already. They are secretaries and they are ink and paint girls. So they're sort of like doing the fill-in work
Yeah.
on the animation. He hires her. She's clearly come to him as an artist. He doesn't hire her as an artist. And we have multiple accounts from other women who were hired to the Disney studios in the 1930s and 40s. For example, Grace Huntington says in her autobiography that he's very frank about being hesitant to hire women to art at this stage because he's worried that he'll put a lot of training in and they'll get married and get pregnant and then he'll lose that employee. But he says story is different in his mind because a writer can still write from home. So he's willing to place a bet on Bianca Majoli. But I also have this sense that I think you can see already in her letters what a talented writer she is. There's this one paragraph where she describes in great detail this high school teacher they both had. Um, and it is like so vivid. I would just love to be able to recapture what they talked about at that first lunch because um, he's clearly already thinking about the importance of story, about what European art and literature can offer the studio. And I just feel as he's talking to this bilingual woman, I feel like he gets a sense that she has a lot to offer, not just as a visual artist, but as somebody with a sense of character and story and a sort of cultural bilingualism that maybe can be utilized better in story than it could even be as an artist.
Yeah, that was so curious to me because even you're talking about her background, she's not she's not known as a writer at that point, right? She's an artist, but she's brought in as a storyteller at Disney.
Yeah, and one of the great records in the archives is pins her as far as I can tell, one of the first, if not the first person that he sets among the 335 books that he's brought back from Europe. So in a memo to Ted Sears, who's the head of story, he's describing the books he brought back from Europe, what he's interested about them, and he says in this long memo, I've got Bianca Majoli in there trying to get some story ideas together.
And what's it like for her being in there in terms of the creative department?
It's it seems to have been challenging. She, uh, there probably was it seems like there was a great deal of culture shock. She's like, this is a completely male environment, but it's also a certain kind of masculinity because I feel like you read this in all the descriptions on the studio at the time, the studio culture. It's like a comedy factory. Like this is a gag factory. It's a place where even though there's this new emphasis on story coming from the top, ideas aren't shared in writing. Grace Huntington, who I mentioned a minute ago, in her autobiography describes how pitch meetings are almost like improv classes. Like you don't submit your idea to the boss. You get up in front of a group, you have to act out your idea, doing the
Oh.
voices and everything. And it's a tough audience. Like she says in particular that there's like in that culture that men don't laugh at each other's gags. Um, it's just a
Mm.
tough place. It's a rambunctious place. Another woman who starts working at the studios in the 1930s, Sylvia Holland, says um, that she describes Walt as always having to try to domesticate his employees because they're always in sort of the pursuit of the best gag. They're often going too far, and there's a lot of obscenity and vulgarity. And I think it's in part that Bianca Majoli is when she starts the only woman on the creative team, but also she just has a different sensibility. She seems to be incredibly introverted. A lot of her abilities seem to come from this very quiet awareness of human nature, like a sort of like she's a listener and a watcher.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and she's been brought in to do this sort of like delicate nuancing story work, and she's like been thrown into uh this like room of rambunctious men. And I think there are other women who come on later who seem to do a little bit better. Like Dorothy Ann Blank is hired the next year. She's actually specific. She's a woman who's got a different sensibility. She's hired to work with the gag files in particular. And when you read the notes from meetings that they were both in, Dorothy Ann Blank seems very comfortable speaking out, but Bianca Majoli is like she's very quiet, and she is on the record with a couple of different historians being like, I hated those meetings.
But she has Walt's ear, right? So I wonder if that puts her in even a more complicated, unsteady footing with the boys' club.
Yeah, because I think there's this sense of competition a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And Walt is a tough customer. He's also very sparing with his positive feedback. There's one of the most interesting documents that I came across was a memo from Walt to Bianca Majoli after she's given him some advice on the Bambi script. This is something I talk about in the article. And he says to her, I'm impressed with the work you've been doing on Bambi. Keep up the good work. And I just feel like it's, if you're, when you're reading about the studio culture, it's so rare to see him giving praise like that. And yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if this sort of adds to the difficulties that she's perhaps encountering with other employees.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought up Bambi because I'm fascinated to think about. Well, first of all, vulgarity is a word I would never even think of for Disney, right? And you think about these early movies and they're so beautiful and moving and iconic. And so something like Bambi, tell us about if Bianca hadn't have been involved in Bambi, what the plot may have been like instead.
Yeah, this is I think one of my like that just got sort of like trying to trace her contributions on this film was so interesting. So first of all, in the early meetings, as a former professor, I feel like in some of these Bambi meetings, I was reminded of when you're teaching and you can tell who did the reading in class and who didn't really. She and Walt Disney are referencing the story, Felix Salten's novel Bambi, in these very specific ways to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody else is really doing that. They
Mm-hmm.
clearly have a sense of the story, but it's not clear that anybody else read the books. Which, by the way, this is one of my favorite things that I discovered about Walt Disney too, because I think he always liked to play up this folksy image and emphasize that he never went to college. And I think critics of the Disney films sort of accuse them of like dumbing down literature. It is so obvious that he read these books very closely.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but so uh, there is a memo in the Disney archives in which she describes she's relaying to Walt Disney what happened at a meeting that Walt sent them on with to look at some photographs, some nature photographs of deer. So she and some of these other guys, they get there and she's describing to Walt. She says, "Oh, I spoke with great interest to the photographer's widow." She calls her Mrs. Dickey. Um, and it turns out that Mrs. Dickey is Florence Van Vechten Dickey, who was the wife of a famous nature photographer. The Dickey archives are at the UCLA libraries now. But she was also a naturalist in her own right and wrote a book about California birds that went through multiple editions with Stanford University Press. So already the fact that these women are having this conversation is so interesting to me because based on what the general culture sounds like at the studios, I don't imagine that her male colleagues were going to this widow and saying, "We're dying to hear your thoughts on this material."
Yeah.
But she and Bianca get in this conversation, and then Bianca Majoli reports to Walt. She says that even that this aspect of the plot that we've stuck close to the novel on, which is keeping Bambi's father as the most influential figure in his life, she says that's all wrong. She says that male deer basically abandoned the child. And she uses this interesting phrase in the memo. She says, she claims that Van Vecht and Dickey said that such an error is a sock in the eye to a naturalist. And I think this is actually a great example of Bianca Majoli's talent as a writer. She's
Mm.
capable of these long, elegant phrases. She has some of them in the same memo, but I think she knows just how to get Walt's attention. She uses this really folksy, down to earth, succinct phrase to
Mhm.
to say to him, "We got it wrong, and I really want you to pay attention." And um, it seems like he does because, a lot of people work on a movie, a lot of things happen over the course of an adaptation, but the movie that we end up with is not the movie that you see in outlines of the script prior to this memo.
Mm.
Um, by the end, it's really the father still the father still has an important role, but it's quite reduced. It's only a few scenes. He only has a few lines of dialogue. And instead, the emotional core is the relationship between Bambi and his mother. And that's why one of the most famous scenes in Disney history is this scene where Bambi's mother is shot. It was the first movie I saw in a theater as a child. I still remember it.
Oh, it's I don't, there's no one who doesn't, and it's often, I think, cited as the saddest moment ever, and the first time a child even can think of the idea of losing their parent, their
And it
mother.
is, I think, so emblematic of this way that she can drill down to the heart of a story. She understands characters so well. I think a lot of the talent, because I feel like I've been sort of teasing about the culture and things. These men were clearly incredibly talented. And like there are comic bits in these movies like Flower joke, the pun on Flower, the skunk, and like those things stick in your memory too, thumper thumping, but this is what she was good at.
Yeah, yeah.
She could find that emotional core, and she could figure out how to persuade Walt to she could move the needle on Walt, I think. And you see that, I believe, most clearly in the most elaborate sort of text that she leaves behind in the archives, which is this full-length translation she did of Pinocchio at Walt's insistence. And I don't know if we actually have time to get into it, but if not, I'll just urge people to go to the article because I think this remnant she leaves us is just is so impressive.
And it's again serves as an outline to what the movie actually became.
Yeah, it's crazy because this is actually, I think the mention of this translation in a couple of other Disney histories is probably what first piqued my interest in her. It seemed so strange to me as a literary scholar that a head of studio would ask somebody to do a full-length translation of a 36 chapter book. I was like, this is an error in the record. He asked her to do a treatment. I'm sure of it. Um, but it's in the archives, and I have to thank really quickly my Disney librarian and archive friends, Eileen Kutaka, Francesca Scrimger, and Nicole Carroll, who helped me hunt these things down. Um, it really is. He asked her to do a full length, more than 100-page translation. It is such an elegant text. She is a writer, isn't necessarily a talented translator. She is an artful translator. She takes such pride in this work. As somebody who works on, among other weird things, Nuns Convent Chronicles, you get trained to look for signs of writers taking pride in work that is might be for a limited audience. The way she creates this title page, even though it has an audience of one in theory,
Mm.
she says this is a translation. It is perfect. It is beautiful, and it's by Bianca Majoli. And she makes these tiny choices in her translation that do things minimize some of the gags that maybe go on too long in Collodi. and that play up the father-son relationship. Again, the emotional core of this. She makes these little choices, for example, where just really quick, and then I'll bring this to a close. Ragazzo is a word in Italian that you can translate as boy, or you can translate as son, depending on the context. It can mean either thing. And I've compared her translation to contemporary English translations from the time. And there's sometimes where other translators are, in the development of the relationship between Geppetto and Pinocchio, are having him say, boy, stop that. Boy, don't do this. And she's translating it more often as son, because from the get-go, she's trying to build a more emotional father-son relationship that will suit the screen adaptation better.
Is there any place someone could go to see that translation? Is it available anywhere?
I wish.
No.
No,
Okay.
locked up in the vault.
That leads to a question we had from Harold, which is Disney Library located at the Disney studio? Like, where did the books end up?
Such a great question. So, in the 1980s, the library of the Disney studio was disbanded. As a resource center, as people were sort of moving to other kinds of resources, I guess primarily the internet, they decided that it had sort of outlived its usefulness. And so some of the books, by then they had acquired thousands of books. Some of those books are still Disney property. They're kept at the Imagineering Resource Center, which is a resource library for the Imagineers, the creatives who build theme park attractions and things like this. But most of those books are honestly just lost. They they were given as gifts or sold as copies, and but we do still have the acquisitions catalog. So
you know what was in it.
What was in there was still kept.
Okay. So I don't think this is in this story. Was Bianca a parent herself?
She wasn't. She did have a lovely partnership. She married another artist, and they opened a gallery together.
Because she left Disney pretty early.
Yeah. And this is, there's lots of burnout among creatives at the Disney studios in the 1930s and 40s. It just is like, it's a tough gig. Like the hours are hard, the deadlines are unrelenting, the criticism can be tough. And she took a leave of absence around the time that Pinocchio was released. And she went back in the summer of 1940 to claim her seat, and it was somebody else's desk. And she was informed unceremoniously by a colleague that she had been fired. And she said speaking to animation historian John Kingmaker late in her life, she said, "I felt so relieved."
Really?
Yeah, I think it was a complex relationship. I think like she did some of her best work. But also she describes it as having been very difficult. Late in life, at least, she remembered it as, again, speaking to John Kingmaker, she said that she sort of lost her sense of herself as an artist. She describes going to a USC ceramics class while she was working at Disney as a way to sort of like do art away from the studios. And she says, it was a relief to be in a place where I knew people wouldn't criticize or tear up my art, which is a reference to a famous incident that I recount in the article and is recounted in other histories, where Walt tore up some of her concept art for Snow White. And it clearly really impacted her if she's recalling it in those terms 50 years later.
And so she ended up having, Brad just asked, did she ever work in animation or the entertainment industry again?
She did continue to do some creative work for a while. And I don't remember the date on this. She illustrated a golden book. There's like
yeah, of course.
Yeah, there's one, it's like Baby's House or something. I got it off eBay at some point. So she continued to do some artistic work, but she didn't go work for another studio.
What was the name of it again?
I think it's a Baby's House.
Okay, I have a Mary Blair golden book here in my house somewhere. So another Disney.
I think she's uncredited on this golden book,
okay.
John Kingmaker, I think she said it, she described it in this conversation with John Kingmaker. Okay. I'm also a big Mary Blair stan, of course. And part of what is fun about working on Bianca Majoli is is hoping that someday the contributions of Bianca Majoli and some of these other women that I have named in this conversation, that who you can read about in also other Disney historians' books, that they that the more we talk about them, the more they'll get closer to sort of like a Mary Blair level of renown. And maybe
Right.
it's a good moment to say that if you want to know more about, if you want to learn a little bit more about Bianca Majoli's life, and you want to see some of her concept art, because she did also at different points get brought into doing concept art. You can see some of it in the catalog to the exhibition I named, that was at the Huntington and the Met. You can see it in Didier Guez's wonderful series, They Drew as They Pleased. Um,
Hmm.
that includes some of her art. And if you want to know more about the Europe trip and the 335 books, Didier Guez has a book called Disney's Grand Tour.
Fantastic. You're an amazing resource. I'm not
I feel like as
surprised.
a professor, you always have to name your sources.
No, it's great. This is such a great conversation. And we will, just so the audience knows, we'll include links to all of those books. We capture the titles while we do it. So in your in the email that you'll get after this, we'll include links to all of that. Lastly, I would just, Shannon, my last thing for you, and then we'll wrap it up, is complexity. Disney is a complex character. Are you a Disney lover at heart? Like, can you be both a critic and a lover at the same time?
Yeah, I actually think maybe this is the historian in me. It's like we work on a lot of things that um, we want to know every angle of, but that doesn't mean we don't still love it. And in fact, I'm a Disneyland Magic Key holder. If you go through my son's drawers, you'll find a bunch of Disney T-shirts. We're a Disney family, and that's I think sometimes. I feel like with a figure like Walt Disney, who can be divisive, maybe. I don't think you have to take an either or stance on him. I think the more we know about a figure like that, the more we can appreciate the nuances of what they did. I feel like the more I learn about how hard Disney was with his employees, the more I come to appreciate these gifts he had. In still say being able to motivate them and being able to like, the more I find out about his work in the library, the more I'm impressed with the way that he could draw out the kernel of a very dark story like Pinocchio or Bambi. And with something like so yeah, I think actually this is just to say that the more we know about a figure, the more we can be honest about our love of what they produced, and the more we can appreciate maybe the personal struggles they and the people around them overcame.
Fantastic. That's a great perspective. Thank you so much, Shannon. I encourage everyone to check out this current issue of Alta, where we have Shannon's story, and to come back next week. We will be talking to two people who are Greyhound rescue. The Greyhound dogs. We have a great story also in this issue about the last Greyhounds of the West Coast who had to be rescued in this incredible, like, critical mission out of Tijuana. It's a really propulsive, like, very beautiful story, though, also about what people who love these dogs and why. So we'll be talking to two of those rescuers at next week's Alta Live. And be sure to come back also, remember, for California Book Club next week with Amy Tan. At the end of this, there'll be a really quick survey. We really encourage you to take it. It's only a minute or two. It means a ton to us to hear back from you. And again, thank you, Shannon, and can't wait to look at all these resources.
Thanks so much. This has been so fun.
All right, bye.